All right, we got it. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the monthly webinar. We took a little bit of a different direction at the last minute. This webinar was intended to discuss the 2024 administrative plan updates, which we will do. But in lieu of HUD's final budget announcement to housing authorities on Friday, we're able to also talk about an opportunity that we now have to issue some housing choice vouchers. So we'll take probably the majority of the webinar to talk about that. But let's get started. I do have Kimberly Dickey today monitoring the Q&A. So by all means, if you have any questions, please use that function and Kimberly will answer them. And then we can discuss when the webinar allows for questions. All right, let's get started. So to begin, the 2024 administrative plan for our, the majority for our housing choice voucher program, but we also incorporate our other voucher programs into that administrative plan. So for purposes of our administrative plan, we call it our rental assistance programs administrative plan. It is effective May 1st, 2024. You probably recall that we had discussed earlier in the year that plan was out for public comments. I believe starting February, the first week in February. We were able to hold a public hearing in March where we did receive some public input that we incorporated into the administrative plan. I think for the first time in a long time, we were able to do that. So that was a great experience. We have two different versions of our administrative plan. They are currently still in draft status on our website. I've provided the link here, and we are in the process of moving them over to the final status section of the website. But because of a website updates that we are currently going through statewide, state of Colorado website updates, it may not be out there just yet, but you still do have access to the draft versions. The reason we have two different versions of our administrative plan is because we have HOTMA, Housing Opportunities Through Modernization Act. The final two sections for purposes of our program had to be incorporated in our most recent administrative plan, as well as the INSPIRE, the updated inspection protocol requirements had to be included in the administrative plan, even though neither one of them are currently effective or implemented. So it was a little complicated. So we wanted to make sure we had an administrative plan that's effective May 1st with any updates that we made. And then to meet the requirements of HUD, we also wanted to have another version of our administrative plan that incorporated all of those upcoming changes that are not implemented yet. We'll talk about some of those timeframes. So you will see two versions out there. The good news is because we knew HOTMA was coming and INSPIRE was coming, we opted to not make a whole lot of changes to our regular administrative plan, with the understanding that there will be a whole lot of changes coming. We didn't want to complicate things. I'll go through what the changes were, and in the slides that we will provide to you afterwards, you will see highlighted in blue what's effective now with this May 1st, 2024 version, and then everything else kind of what's coming. So again, we are required to have HOTMA and INSPIRE updates, edits, and additions in our admin plan. HUD's current rule is that HOTMA must be implemented no later than January 1st of 2025. And housing authorities can choose their implementation date with strings attached and caveats, right? HUD says we can't implement HOTMA until our software is able to incorporate the changes, and our software, and not just our software, everyone's software, can't incorporate the changes until HUD has made their changes to their data collection system. For those of you who understand what those systems are. It's moving from PIC to HIP. And so until they have fully transitioned over to the new data collection system, HIP, the software companies cannot create these updates to their products. So all that to say, HOTMA must be implemented no later than January 1st of 2025. This date could potentially be pushed out depending on all of the data system transitions that are scheduled to happen this summer, and the different software companies' ability to meet the requirements. We will obviously update you all when we know, but for now, that's the date that we are required to have our changes implemented by. So that said, our admin plan, the HOTMA Inspire version that you will see on the website, does have these changes implemented. So we won't have to put the plan out for public notice or public input because we've already done that piece. And then Inspire, which is our new inspection protocol, has to be implemented by housing authorities no later than October 1st, 2024. We requested that date from HUD as our implementation date. They approved us for that implementation date. However, this is something that our software elite will have ready prior to that date. And so as we work to train our staff, I'm not training our staff, as our identified staff work to get trained on becoming Inspire inspectors and trainers, this could happen earlier. Obviously, again, we will make sure that training is provided to everybody before we roll it out, but our software is ready to go with that update, which is great. We're just not ready just to roll it out just yet. And then just to repeat myself, the Division of Housing will implement HOTMA pending further guidance from HUD and our software provider. So let's talk about briefly what these changes will look like. I do say briefly, our intention, as I've underlined here on the slide, is that we will provide an in-depth training on these changes because some of them are rather complex and quite a change from the way we are used to doing business. And so I can give you an overview here. One of the documents that I will send out after this webinar, and that is also available on our website, is I think it's called the 2024 Admin Plan Update Summary document. It includes what I am including in these next few slides, just chapter by chapter, where you're going to see those changes. But then we've also provided a lot of the HUD resource sheets that HUD has provided us that really digs into what those changes look like if you want to do some advanced reading before our upcoming trainings that we hope to roll out this summer on HOTMA. So you do have access to that information. If I, leave things to be desired here with these slides, which I most likely will do because our kind of the priority topic we want to talk about today is issuing those available vouchers. There is more information provided in one of our documents, and of course we will provide training for you when we have that ready. But let's start with chapter 3 regarding eligibility. HOTMA has placed a restriction on eligibility based on assets. This is a mandatory HOTMA policy that assistance may not be provided, and I underlined may, and I'll tell you why. May not be provided to any family if the family's net assets exceed $100,000, and that amount will be adjusted annually by HUD to take into account for inflation, because $100,000 today is going to be different in 10 years, right? So that number is probably going to go up. And we say may because HUD's guidance actually allows housing authorities 4 levels of enforcement on this. What was a mandatory policy now has a little wiggle room. For applicants coming onto the program for the first time, there is no wiggle room. The rule is mandatory if our applicants have family net assets that exceed $100,000, or the second bullet, if they have real property that is suitable for occupancy by the family, with of course some exceptions, they are not eligible as applicants to come onto the program. Excuse me. So for applicants, it is a mandatory restriction. If they have these two assets, they are not eligible to become program participants. Now, where the housing authorities have some enforcement options is for our existing participants who we come upon their annual reexam following when HOTMA is implemented, whatever that date may be. If they have those family net assets that exceed $100,000, or they do own real property that they could be living in, but maybe they're using it as a rental, or maybe they're letting their brother live in the unit or something like that. The housing authority can make a determination if we will allow those participants to remain on the program. Again, we have 4 levels of enforcement options. We have put all of those in the admin plan draft with the HOTMA updates, but we haven't decided yet. I did go to a training on HOTMA last week at the Colorado and Mountain Plains NARO conference that talked a little bit more about it, but I want to attend a few more HOTMA sessions and training so I can get an understanding of the impact of what enforcement level we choose will have on our participants. So the biggest change to our administrative plan, and again, you haven't seen any blue highlights yet, so nothing I have talked about so far is implemented today. These are all future once HOTMA is implemented. But the biggest change you're going to see, if you're curious and want to look at that draft plan that's out there, is in Chapter 6 regarding income and subsidy determinations. This entire chapter is going to look completely different. In fact, we have a model admin plan that we purchased and subscribe to from Nan McKay, which is wonderful because when there are huge changes, not just a couple little changes to policy, I can just copy and paste the whole new chapter into our admin plan, which normally I go through, okay, here's a change on this page, here's a change on this page. It was the entire Chapter 6. So I have gone through and just sort of wiped out Chapter 6, replaced it with everything, just to give you some highlights on those changes. And again, please refer to the resource document that we'll be sending and that are currently on our website if you want to dig into this a little more. But some of the big changes are to our deductions for elderly or disabled. We're going to see an increase of a $400 a year deduction to $525 in a deduction. And what's awesome, I guess, is that HUD's going to be adjusting this for inflation finally, right? If you've been doing this program for as long as I have, you know it's been a $400 deduction for elderly or disabled family for at least 20 years, probably longer. And then same for the dependent deduction. It's always been $480 per dependent. But this will, following this year, we'll see these numbers go up. So to take into account for inflation, we're going to see that 480 maybe be 500 the following year, maybe be 520 the following year. So we're actually going to see some movement on those numbers. So that's great. But a big change that we're really trying to wrap our heads around, and maybe those of you who have your own voucher programs are feeling the same stress with the updates to the medical expense deduction. Not necessarily to the deduction, but to the whole process around determining hardship, determining medical expense costs. There's like remember earned income disregard, right? You get 100% this year, you get 50% next year. There's a lot of tracking that's going to go along with something that we're pretty used to in our program. So right now, prior to HOTMA, the medical expense deduction threshold is 3%. That means a family can pay 3% of their annual income towards medical, out-of-pocket medical expenses. Anything above that, we can deduct and take into consideration to reduce their annual income so that their rent is calculated based on this new annual income amount less all the deductions they're eligible for. Wow, do I feel like a tax specialist? With HOTMA, this is going to increase to 10%. So that is to say that a family can now pay 10% of their annual income towards out-of-pocket medical expenses. There are several different ways we can still give our families that credit for the out-of-pocket medical expenses. But what we are going to see with this change is that the dog is joining the webinar. not as many potentially medical expenses that we're currently counting are going to count. And I think what HUD's thought process there is that, well, we're increasing the elderly and disabled family deduction on an annual basis, right? It's not going to stay at 525, it's going to keep going up. And we're going to increase that dependent deduction, so that should balance out. But we know, because the majority of our vouchers do serve people who include a person with a disability, that our families tend to have in some cases, pretty high out-of-pocket medical expenses. So we need to do a little more investigation on how this is going to impact those families specifically. So more to come when we talk about those PAMA trainings. And then determining income from assets is a pretty big change coming. The imputed income from assets will not be calculated now until the assets exceed $50,000. Right now it's $5,000. So anything family's assets in excess of $5,000 right now, we include whatever the imputed asset rate is, which we determine as a housing authority right now, and then we count whatever that percentage is as cash or as income. Well, now HUD has increased that to $50,000. So a family can have $50,000 in assets, and we are not counting any of the potential interest that could be earned on those assets as income. That's great for our families, especially, as we say, if you reach a certain family asset limit, you may not be eligible for the program anymore. So this kind of, again, I think is HUD's way of, we took here, but we'll give here. And then regarding that passbook rate, as I mentioned, right now, housing authorities can determine their own passbook rate. I think it's like within 0.75% of what the national passbook rate is, and then we set that every year. But HUD's going to be setting that for us. So we don't have to do that math. We can't select our own passbook rate, and this will be variable as well. It's going to change as the market changes. So, okay, here is a change that impacts everyone now. It's highlighted in blue in Chapter 7 regarding verification. We talked about this, I believe, in 2023 as well. There is a new form, the HUD 9886 form. I think it's called the 9886A, I believe. And so starting January 1st of 2024, any family that signs this new HUD release form, the 9886A, we should be incorporating this form at any interim or annual reexam. Anytime you're meeting with a family, it only needs to be signed one time by adult family members for the life of the program. They don't have to sign it every year. This way, this is that one form that HUD needs our families to sign so they can access Social Security information. They can access the Department of Labor so that they can provide for the Housing Choice Voucher and the Emergency Housing Voucher Program, the EIV access, so that we can verify income, make sure income is being calculated correctly, and so on. If a family misses signing it or refuses to sign it, we can't serve that family anymore in this voluntary housing program that they are part of. So that form only needs to be signed one time. It is on our website. However, if a child in the household turns 18, to pull out that form, dust it off from the file, right? This is probably one of those forms where we're going to want to keep in part one of the file that pulls forward if you're still using paper files. And then when a child turns 18 or when a new adult is added to the household, they will have to sign that original form. So something to keep in mind. Families that refuse to sign this form or who choose to revoke the consent, which they are allowed to do, will end up being terminated from the program. This is one of those HUD forms. There's no alternative. It must be signed if you want to participate in the program. So it's blue, and that's effective now. So more changes regarding verification of income, using other programs' income determinations, which could be considered safe harbor. Income determinations from means-tested federal assistance programs can be accepted in order to make an income verification and calculation processes easier. So what does that mean? The food stamp office in a county has to do income determinations to determine the value or the amount of their benefit. if they've done that and you have access to the food stamp office's income determination, they said, yes, this is what they're getting every month from this source of income. They're a federal assistance program who are considered to be means tested, meaning trusted, right? We don't have to make our families re-provide everything to us because they've already done it for the food stamp office recently, and the food stamp office can confirm. Again, I'm looking into this. I think we sort of have the upper hand at the Division of Housing because we do have access to the Colorado Benefits Management System, CBMS, for the food stamps and TANF program and A&D program. We have access to the Department of Labor and those kinds of programs. So I think this is something we can dig into a little bit to see what it is that we can provide that will meet the requirement of the safe harbor income determination. Again, it's a way to streamline our administrative processes to make it easier for our families who maybe have difficulty accessing that benefit letter from Social Security or from the VA each year. Another update is that the EIV income reports are no longer required for interims with the HOTMA update. I think prior it's like you do an interim and then within 75 days you want to run that EIV to make sure. This is no longer a requirement. Assets and income from assets. If family net assets total $50,000 or less, this can be verified via a self-certification, similar to what we're doing now. If you're telling me your assets are $5,000 or less, just self-certify it. To complicate the tracking of it all, HUD does say every 3 years, you will want to actually third-party verify those assets and not just take that self-certification every year. But if that's something you can track for your participants, like, hey, you don't have to get your bank statements or your trust, printouts or your 401k, investment documentation. You can tell I have all these things, right? Just self-certify that it's less than $50,000, and then every 3 years we'll double check, make sure. This should eliminate a lot of burden from our families and then make those re-exam processes go a little quicker. Here is a change in blue that is effective as of January 1st of 2024. And that is that the Earned Income Disallowance Program for persons with disabilities is no longer accepting new admissions as of January 1st. The current participants who are on that EID clock will be able to utilize the remainder of their time. But as of January 1st, no new EID admissions are allowed. Okay, Chapter 8. So in the HOTMA and Inspire version of our admin plan, you will see that Chapter 8 has been completely revamped. It no longer says HQS. And in fact, the entire administrative plan does not reference HQS. I'll just read it throughout. The administrative plan, HQS has been replaced with either Inspire, Inspection, or Space Standards. Again, just a reminder, until we actually implement Inspire, we will continue to use HQS as our inspection protocol. The non-HOTMA version of the administrative plan will contain 2 chapters. Chapter 8, regular HQS, no change. And then we've also added Chapter 8A, which is the Inspire chapter, just so you have reference. But until further notice, HQS is perfectly fine and allowed. Even though I know some of us went to the NARO conference last week and heard that we should be using Inspire right now, the Division of Housing is not ready to use Inspire right now. And we don't have to because HUD has granted us an October 1st, 2024 implementation date. We are working on it. We are working on creating an Inspire training program so that we can, similar to how we do HQS, certify all of our partners on Inspire. That's going to take us some time. Also, we're still learning Inspire. It's a whole new process. It's a whole new experience. There's new technology associated with it. We just want to really understand it before we take on the responsibility to train all of you. Okay, Chapter 11, regarding reexaminations, there are many changes to the interim reexamination policy and process. Again, I would refer you to those resource documents that we have on the website and that I will send out. But the overall summary of the changes, and again, I believe in 2023, we rolled out a very lenient interim reexamination policy to the benefit of our families. HOTMA comes really close to matching what we have done, but there are some changes that we will incorporate once HOTMA tells us we have to. So increases that are 10% or greater, the Division of Housing will conduct an interim only if the family's unearned income experiences an increase of 10% or greater. I believe our current policy says we won't do anything until their next annual re-exam. However, the HOTMA regulations say if they have unearned income and it increases 10% or greater, we have to do an interim. And then any increases in earned income, we can still wait until the next annual re-exam before we start counting that income. There are there are some time frame pieces that I didn't want to start the conversation here today, but it's like if their re-exam's coming up in 3 months, or if they've already reported an income increase in the last 6 months, there's all these kinds of, like, we're gonna have to create a calendar so you can kind of look to make sure when we will and will not count this income. But just as a general rule, this is what HOTMA is changing. All changes in income must still be reported within 10 days. We're not leaving this up to our families to know. Again, it's going to take us some time to learn it. We don't want our families to be like, but not 10%. Let me get out my calculator. What's 10%? We promised last year a simplified income reporting form, and that is still forthcoming. But because of these HOTMA rollouts, we didn't want to introduce that form and then pull it back and then introduce a new form. But the intention is that instead of completing the full family reporting form, when they're going to report income to us, they just do a one-pager so that we can use that to determine, does an interim need to be completed? And again, we just are waiting for HOTMA. We don't want to recreate the wheel over and over and over again, which we tend to do when we get ahead of ourselves. And I haven't learned yet. So there's also a change to the effective dates of interims. Historically, PHAs are able to set when they will process an income decrease and income increase. When did the family report it? When did it actually become effective? But as a result of HOTMA, the effective dates are now prescribed by HUD in the regulations, or will be once HOTMA is implemented. If the family reports changes to us timely and it results in a rent portion increase, the PHA must provide family with 30 days advance written notice. If the rent portion decreases, that interim will be effective on the first of the month after the date of the actual change, and the decrease will be applied retroactively, and that is only if the family is reported timely. So I think that kind of follows what we're already doing. If changes are not reported timely by our families and the change results in a rent portion increase, the PHA must implement the increase retroactively to the first of the month following the date of the change, leading to the interim. So that's going to result in negative adjustments that we are taking back from the landlord, and the family's having to pay the landlord. I think right now we still bill the family back in the Housing Choice Voucher program through a repayment agreement process, but now we're being asked to take that money back from the landlords, which is going to create some conversation opportunities between us and the landlords. If the changes are not reported timely and it results in a rent portion decrease, the PHA must implement the change no later than the first rent period following the completion of the interim. So again, some time frame things that we're going to need to track that we want to make sure we understand completely, and then we will provide this in a training to y'all. And then finally, these changes are effective with the May 1st, 2024 effective date of our admin plan. and they impact the Continuum of Care Permanent Supportive Housing Program and the state housing voucher programs. And so just to do a quick summary, changes to the security deposit and damage payment section has been updated with our new process. And that is that the grantee in the COC PSH program, this impacts some of you out there, that the grantee can either request the security deposit be paid directly to the landlord, or you, the grantee, can pay that security deposit to the landlord and then submit to the Division of Housing to be reimbursed. That is a change in the COC PSH program only. And then the state housing voucher program has several changes, which are exciting. In the referral packet in regard to vital documents, in part due to the Colorado revised statute, look it up, 24-76.5-103, vital documents for some state funded benefits program are now suggested, but no longer required in order to receive the benefit. It is in detail in that admin plan. An update to the verification of lawful presence. The Division of Housing will generate an alternate ID, similar as we do in the HCV program, to be used in ELITE for participants in lieu of their SSN or their individual taxpayer identification number. And so this is, again, because lawful presence is not necessarily required to receive some state benefits. So that is an update to our state housing voucher program. There is now a list of additional verification methods that can be used to verify a disabling condition. And then in regards to damage payments, just a clarification that these can be requested using the security deposit retainment request, or they can be requested separately. And then a reminder that damage payment amount is equivalent to 1 month of rent and no more. So those are the changes. They're current or coming soon, or maybe not soon, depending on HAMA, to our admin plan. Are there any questions that could not be answered, Kimberly?
I was able to answer them all, but some of them are they're all really good questions. So I don't know if folks see them when they go through, or if we want to read some of them.
So I don't think people can see the questions. I'm happy to read through them. To make sure we cover them. We can also print them out from Zoom. So we can do that. Okay. So I'll just read the questions. If someone owns land but not property on the land, does that still count? And we're talking about the assets for real property. So in that situation, the asset itself would count towards that $100,000 limit. And if their land is valued at more than $100,000, yes, they would not be eligible as an applicant. Again, we're still deciding on existing participants. So yeah, land is just considered an asset, not suitable for living. Now, if they build a house on the land, different story, right? What documentation is needed to determine the value of the land? I don't own land, so I don't know, but that is something that we can get more information on in regards to how you value land. Okay, the 5886A, are we able to continue sending with the recertification packet and update with each action? So that 5886A only needs to be completed one time now. So if you are putting it in your re-exam packets moving forward, kind of keep track of that cutoff time, right? To make sure that everyone's gotten it. But then if you want to keep sending it just to make sure, oops, I'm not sure if we have it, that's fine. But I don't think eternally you need to do that. There will be a point where all of the existing households will be covered. All of the new households, that's the form you start using, right? And so eventually we'll be covered. Does this mean we will start counting food stamps as income if approved? No, never. But food stamps does use a person's income verification to determine benefit. So food stamp says, yep, they provided their pay stubs, they provided their social security, here's a printout of that. We can then use that as income verification for the voucher program, is what we meant by that. Where can you find the administrative plan online? Kimberly did provide that link here in the Q&A. Also provided in this webinar. And I will send those handouts following the webinar once I pull some more things together. And we'll include a link to where on our website you can access the admin plan. Yes, if you're up and due to renew your housing quality standard certification around July or so, still do that? Yes. We are gonna hold out as long as we can until we are, I like to wait until the very last minute to make these changes because I never know when HUD's gonna take a sharp left turn and say, never mind. And I don't want to go through all that work of rolling things out. However, until we have Inspire training out there, HQS is the way. An example of unearned income. What is an example of unearned income? SSI, TANF, child support, A&D, non-wage income is unearned income. What if the landlord doesn't report timely to us? Do we need to go off when the landlord sends it to us or the tenant? The landlord is required by the HAB contract to give a 60-day notice anytime there will be a change to the rent. And so if you don't report to us timely, this is a whole other webinar. I'm not going to jump down this rabbit hole, but yes, we need to honor what the HAB contract says, and that's that we get a 60-day notice. Let's see. Okay. Moving on. Before we talk about voucher issuances, I'm very excited. I don't know that I'm excited, but I need to tell you that there's going to be a change for those of you who are entering into Elite. This is impacting you. We have to change the way we are inputting addresses. This is for landlords, participants, owners, property managers. Anytime we are creating an address in Elite, we now have a change to our tried and true process that goes back many decades. So I just wanted to provide a couple reminders on how to format street addresses and then an update to our process in Elite. So just a reminder, when we are putting in a street address, we must follow, and I say must because we want mail to be delivered. And so mail can only be delivered if we follow the USPS's formatting. Now we know we can be silly and maybe spell things out and put a heart over the I as our dot, and the mail still gets delivered. But in order to really reduce mailing errors, and we get a lot of return mail in our office, so I know this happens, we want to try and be as consistent as possible in terms of abbreviating addresses. I've provided a link. I will also, when I send the follow-up, I have this printed out, the USPS street name abbreviations that they prefer we use. And then for purposes of entering it into Elite, this is really important. And it's really important, especially for our participants who receive a utility assistance payment. We pay the utility assistance payment on the Quest card. That's that card that many of our families have where they receive their SNAP or their food assistance benefits, their TANF cash benefits, their A&D benefits, their OAP, their old age pension benefits. They get it all on this handy card that is issued to them through the Colorado Department of Human Services. We have an agreement with the Colorado Department of Human Services that we've been doing this for 10 years. We can put the utility assistance payment that our families are owed based on their calculation onto that Quest card. It's very convenient. They have all of their cash benefits and food assistance and non-cash benefits on this one card so that they can go to King Soopers and they can get a money order for their Excel bill and they can pay their Excel bill. What we are coming across now with the Department of Human Services is that the way we're formatting our report to them every month that says put this much money on this person's card, the addresses aren't lining up with how they see the addresses in their system. And that is because for many years we have used just that top line in Elite that says 22 South Main Street, and then we'll write APT for apartment 6. Sometimes we spell out the word apartment. Sometimes we put a hash pound sign. Sometimes we spell the word apartment wrong. I don't know. We do a lot of silly things. And when that data file gets to CDHS, it blows up and they can't pay anybody any of the money. So we have agreed, in order to continue to use their very amazing service of getting our families their UAP payments on their card, that we'll change the way we do business to probably be the correct way that we should have been using our system this whole time. And that is, we're gonna not spell out directions. We're gonna not spell out the word street. We're gonna put ST. And we're going to use what's now the suite box. That's changing. I believe that's going to be changing to the word unit instead of suite. But for now, this is what Elite has. We're going to use that suite box to put the unit number, the apartment number, and so on. So this is a change. We're going to do a huge data conversion soon. Not until Jim comes back from his amazing holiday that he's going to be taking here in a couple weeks, where all existing addresses will go through a data conversion to make this change. So we don't have to worry about old addresses, but as you are creating new units, new landlord mailing addresses, new units, new tenant mailing addresses, please follow this new format. Process sheet coming soon. Just wanted to put it on your radar that this is coming. Now, our staff, our SPOCs who review all of the actions that come in will also be doing just a quick review to make sure that address formatting is correct. So please, once this process begins, make sure you're doing this address formatting so we don't miss anything. All right. Any questions on that?
I left one up for you to answer.
Okay. Leslie's asking, do we start this immediately or wait until the process sheet? There are many moves to put in today. What do you think, Kimberly? Are we confident that the letters are printing okay right now?
All of the rent letters appear to be just fine.
Okay. Then I will say yes. Please start using this process now. But do know that when the data transition happens, if you miss one, or you just did one yesterday and you didn't follow this process, it will be absorbed into that big whatever, where somebody writes a script and it goes in and changes everything. You know, I don't work in computers. So we'll be able to capture that. But yes, please do start this process now. When we have the process sheet, we should have a more clarification on when all of that stuff really is going to be finalized, but no harm in doing it now. Okay, voucher issuance and waiting lists. We're going to talk about that we have money available in our budget to put more vouchers on the street. And then I've dusted off an old, here's how you open your waiting list, here's how you purge your waiting list, that I'm going to power through just for those of you who need a refresher on that, but we will talk about kind of the details first. And then we're going to do some weekly office hours for 5 weeks, not 5 consecutive weeks, but for 5 weeks to really dig into your specific questions, because this may not apply to all of you. So hang tight. Voucher issuance and waiting lists. We received our final budget from HUD on Friday for HCV. They sent us our mainstream and they sent us our emergency housing voucher budget about a week earlier. And in those budgets, we saw this very different inflation factor than we had been budgeting for. And so until we had that HCV budget, I didn't want to make any determinations. So we have our final budget. They HUD rebenchmarked us at 99.5%. So what that means is all of the HAP, housing assistance payment dollars we spent in 2023 in our housing choice voucher, in our mainstream voucher program specifically, we are getting 99.5% of that money. This is different. It's been like 100% the last few years. So this was kind of a bummer. but they gave us 99.5% of what we spent in 2023, and that includes our shortfall. We were in shortfall in both HCV and mainstream. HUD gave us a little bit of money to bring us up to not being in shortfall by the end of the year. It wasn't a lot, but we were able to build our budget, including the shortfall funds. Then they gave us 99.5% of what we spent. So if they had just left it at that, we would be in big trouble, because we know those rents are going up and our payment standards are still going up. But then, excuse me, they added a 10.92% inflation factor to that amount. So essentially giving us additional funds to cover our costs, because we were in shortfall for most of 2023 and did not issue any new vouchers. We don't have like all these, vouchers that were issued in 2023 that we can apply this inflation funding to. What that means is we have to put not voucher for voucher, but the vouchers we didn't turn over in 2023, we got to put on the street now. And I mean now, so that we can start spending this excess fund and we don't leave anything on the table for HUD to sweep up at the end of the year. There's a lot of timing that goes along with this. Right now, we have funding for the regular Housing Choice Voucher program and for our mainstream program, which is vouchers that's essentially Housing Choice Voucher, but it's for a specific population. And that's our non-elderly, haven't yet reached their 62nd birthday, and disabled households or applicants. So that's what we're working with. What we are going to ask before we start with you'll have new vouchers to issue. Let's prioritize our Housing Choice Voucher project-based buildings. All of the participants, tenants that are in those project-based projects that you are all administering, who want a tenant-based voucher and who have been in their unit for at least a year, let's get them issued a tenant-based voucher. This will not count towards how many new vouchers that many of you have asked for. Let's clear those out so we can open the project-based units for folks in the continuum of care, coordinated entry lists, who need that level of housing and support. This is a priority. I know we've been pushing this since I think the end of last year when HUD gave us the green light to do that for the specific population. So I really want to prioritize those. And then secondly, we want to prioritize for those few agencies that have our family unification program, our FUP youth vouchers. We need to get that utilization up as well. I'm going to be reaching out to those agencies to let you know where you're at. And if we need to juggle some vouchers between agencies. So stay tuned on that. So those are our two priorities we would love. And we don't need to open a waiting list, right? The HCV project-based folks are already in the system. Let's just get them issued that tenant-based, no waiting list necessary. And FUP, we get those referred through various sources. And so no waiting list necessary there. So those are ones we can get. And again, I know the FUP is based on referral. You may not have any referrals in your community. We'll talk about that. Just a reminder, we'll send out some invitations. We will do office hours for 1 hour at 11 o'clock on these days, starting next Wednesday. I think that's a Wednesday. It's a Wednesday. And then each Wednesday, with the exception of a few, we'll just be available for your very specific questions, because I know I'm not going to be able to hit them all today. And then just providing that Zoom link, but I will send it out. A reminder, I did send out a voucher interest survey on Monday to our mailing list. It went out to everybody, and then I added supervisors in the case that they were not on my mailing list. Please, if you haven't, fill out the survey just to give us an idea. And even if you're not interested in new vouchers at all, it's helpful for us to see that. If you could please just fill that survey out. I may send a reminder link about it. And just as a plug, we also have cat vouchers available. Now, my cat Marty was excited and said he's ready to move out and he would love his own cat voucher, but it is not for cats. It is our community access team program. And these are individuals who are currently, for the most part, in a nursing home and don't need that level of care, but do need a little extra support. So they would be provided this voucher. and connected with transition coordination services paid for by Medicaid and provided by transition coordination agencies. If you are interested in these vouchers, we do have a need for voucher administrators to issue those.
I left you a question about that slide.
Okay.
And Marty's adorable.
Does this apply to state housing voucher, project-based voucher? Not at this time. That the state housing voucher PBVs have a specific eligibility requirement if they have tenant-based vouchers available by project. And I know there's a limit to how many tenant-based vouchers each year are available for projects. So I would encourage you to reach out to your SPOC if you have state housing voucher, project-based vouchers that you're interested in transitioning to state housing voucher tenant-based. And then your SPOC can connect with our state housing voucher team to determine each project. Do we have to open a wait list to offer it to just the internal wait list we have for HCV, SHV, PBV? I'm not sure I understand that question, Davida, and only because I'm not the PBV expert. So maybe maybe if Lynn is able to, I don't know if Lynn's on because she had another. We may have to get back to you on that one, Davida, because I'm not sure on that one. Kimberly, can you just snip that question for me so I don't have to try and track it down? Okay, so do these HCVs need to be issued within the next 60 days? We'll talk about that right now. We have some time frames in order for this to work. And not in order for it to work, but if we want to get the most vouchers issued, the most bang for our buck, as they say, time is of the essence. The sooner we can get vouchers in hands of eligible applicants, the more likely we are to start spending this money. So if we were like, okay, I've got to open my waiting list still, that, we know it can't happen for at least 30 days because we have to put that public notice out. We'll talk about this. And then we'll have to enter everyone into the waiting list. And then we have to sort it and sequence it. Then we have to draw. Then we have to send those people notice that they, and they come in and they have to provide. It's a timely process. It just is. It takes a while. And so if we are like 5 months from now, finally the people are starting to lease up, it's October. And we're only now just spending this excess money, and we're not going to be able to spend it all immediately. And what happened a couple years ago and why we were in shortfall in 2023 was that we did a hurry up and get those vouchers in the hands of folks, but we did it differently. We just blanketly increased everyone's baseline and said, you have 20% more vouchers, go forth. Not everybody was ready. Not everybody wanted them. Some people wanted more, some people didn't want as many. And by the time the vouchers kind of got around to being issued and leased up, it was the end of the year, and it didn't start costing us money until the early months of 2023, where HUD had come in and swept our reserve. If we have more than 4% or something like that of our annual budget in reserve, and that number fluctuates, and I have a sense this year it's going to be lower based on how they're planning on funding our 2025 budget. HUD will take our reserves and said, you don't need it. You didn't spend it. You don't need it. We're going to take it and use it to help housing authorities in shortfall, us. So I guess we paid for our own shortfall, right? But then we start spending money that HUD took from us. So right now we have money in reserves. We're projected to have money in reserves at the end of the year, but we're allowed to spend that. So if we can spend it down and leave a small amount in reserves, HUD will keep our reserves. We'll get funded at a higher level next year because we'll have hundreds of new vouchers, right, that we didn't have in 2023. It's a time game. So let's talk about time frames. Current wait list. If you have a current wait list, once you find out how many vouchers we're able to give your agency, you can draw an issue. We're asking in the next 30 days. If we give you 50 new vouchers, draw and issue 50 vouchers or 10, every few days or whatever you need to do that makes sense for your agency. This is the best option for us to start using those vouchers. If we can get the people with current wait lists, and current means you have purged it recently or it was recently opened, the people on the wait list are still here, still needing the voucher. It's not a year old or 2 years old and who knows where they are, right? You can send them that letter and the letter actually gets to them. That's a current wait list. This is where we can kind of, you know, get that really good head start with getting these vouchers issued and costing us money. If you have an outdated wait list, we're asking that you purge it as soon as possible. We'll talk about purging in this webinar, and we can provide you with guidance in our office hours that we will have scheduled for the next few weeks. You know, we don't give them 30 days to respond in your purge, give them a 15-day response time. And depending on the number of applicants you have on your outdated wait list, you might also consider opening your wait list at the same time that you're purging your current wait list. Again, these are details we can work through with you if you wanted to reach out to your spot. We can talk about what that looks like. You all look different. You all cover different jurisdictions. You all have different number of people on your wait list, different number of people in your office, and we understand that there's not one system that's going to fit you all. If you do not have anyone on your current wait list, we ask that you get that public notice posted as soon as possible. Again, it has to be published for 30 days before you can start taking applications, but then plan to draw an issue, building in that public notice time within the next 60 days. This isn't if you guys can't meet these timelines, then you're out of luck situation. That's not the case. But again, as time passes, the number of available vouchers that we have to give will decrease. So every month we lose where we're not spending money, I have to adjust the number of vouchers we can put out on the street because we've lost a month of spending. And so right now the numbers look good and healthy for people to get, for the most part, what you are asking for. But if we don't have a good system to get those vouchers issued to people, and that number is going to decrease a little bit. Okay. Any questions so far before I move on to the?
I left one up there that I'm not sure if you've answered or not, but then Leslie just put another one for you.
Okay. So Max is asking, since we have an active wait list, completed a purge this year, when can we anticipate a new allocation of vouchers to put them in the hands of participants? That is a great question, Max. So I sent out the survey. I just want to get an idea of what people want, what agencies want. And I know, Max, you want all of them. So, and I want to give agencies what they are asking for. And again, it looks like we can, but I need everyone to respond to that survey. And it's okay if you don't want more vouchers. And I'm sorry, I'm talking about housing choice vouchers right now. That's what we have funding for, and mainstream, but you can consider them all one. As soon as enough agencies respond to that survey, I will probably by Friday know how many vouchers I can increase your baselines at your agencies. Now, there are things to take into consideration. So Max, good example, you guys have BUP and you guys have a project-based building. I believe you have an HCV project-based building. So we want to prioritize those and then build up that baseline with some available vouchers. So you've got the opportunity to get even more than what you're asking for because you've got two of those priority categories. And so once we can get those survey responses in, I will, yes, and I know the COG's going to go door to door and asking folks if they're ready for a tenant-based voucher. Love that. We should know by Friday. Okay, Leslie, I answered the survey for what we can take immediately. Do I need to correct that number so we can get vouchers all year long? As DOH has them to give, I have a wait list if this makes sense. Yeah, so what I need to know is how many vouchers you can take now. And I don't mean that means you have to issue them all and get them all leased up in the next 60 days, but what you can healthfully, not a word, what you as an agency can realistically handle. So if I gave you 100 vouchers, what I don't want to see happen is, okay, I can do 10 this month and 10 next month and 10 in July and 10 in August. And if that's what you can do as an agency, I understand. Again, I know staffing shortage is real. We are also experiencing that as well. And I know that the housing market is outrageous. and that people can't necessarily lease up right away without a little extra support. We do understand that. But without agencies that can take like 50 today and issue all 50 in a month or something like that, we're not going to experience the cost benefit. And an unutilized baseline, meaning so if we gave you 100 and you were able to use 50 in the next few months, we may have to take back some of those unused vouchers. As we learn, we have less and less money. So just tell me in the survey what you could, realistically take now and really work within the next 60 days or so. And then we will go from there. Great question, Tony. Will you tell us which ones are mainstream and which are HCV? So because the majority of our agencies open their waiting list for the disability preference, I do this every week before we start submitting actions to HUD through that data transfer process. I look at each new admission and I say, would this person qualify for a mainstream voucher? And I just change your increment behind the scenes and kind of mess with your baselines in that way. So that's why a lot of you see that MNSTRM in front of some of your increments. And that's because your household is led by a non-elderly disabled individual, and we can use that separate pot of money that HUD sends us, where we have like 50, I have 50 available spots in that program. Because we're in shortfall, I couldn't issue it. So you guys don't have to worry about that. I kind of do that behind the scenes and just sort of juggle your baseline. So again, you're not experiencing a change. If you said you wanted 100, you got 100. It might just be a mix of HCV and mainstream. I do that behind the scenes. You don't even need to know. All right. So I'm going to power through again this dusted off webinar that we did, I think last year or the year before. You'll have it available, but please do, for those of you who are interested in these vouchers, take advantage of those office hours and the meeting with your SPOC to talk about the process. So we're going to briefly talk about opening and closing the waiting list, what our current preferences are when you open the waiting list, who can these vouchers be used for. We have a 2-application process we'll talk about. We'll do a quick overview on what it looks like to purge an existing wait list. We'll address the frequently asked questions, and then we provide some resources, and if time allows, questions. So opening the waiting list, again, Housing Choice Voucher program. We are lucky, HUD tells us through the Code of Federal Regulations what we have to do when we open a waiting list. It's not left to us to decide. When the PHA opens a waiting list, we must give public notice that families may apply for this tenant-based assistance, and that public notice must state where and when to apply. We provide an example public notice. It gives way too much information. You can pick and choose and personalize it for your own waiting list opening. The PHA must give the public notice by publication in a local newspaper of general circulation. Still, do people read the newspaper? I don't know. I don't. I look at websites, right? So putting it in a newspaper of general circulation, putting it on your website, on your agency's website, may also be a way to, but you must do it in the newspaper of general circulation in your community. That is a requirement still of HUD. Also suggested that you publish in minority media and other suitable means. So if you have in your community a large Spanish-speaking population and there is a newspaper that is in Spanish, really consider putting that public notice translated into Spanish into that media as well. And the notice must comply with HUD fair housing requirements, offering a reasonable accommodation if individuals with a disability cannot meet the requirements of the application that you have in your public notice. And then the public notice must also state any limitations on who may apply for available slots in the program. You can open this up for a very specific population of people that meet the local preferences that the Division of Housing has established. We'll talk about those. HUD is clear that we have to make every effort to outreach people with this public notice and with this resource. PHA outreach efforts must comply with fair housing requirements. We have to identify our underserved populations. We have to target underserved populations in the community. Ensure outreach efforts target the underrepresented populations, and then avoid any efforts that may intentionally or unintentionally exclude people in protected classes. Now, our local preferences are for people with disability, people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing domestic violence, people exiting an institution like a nursing home or a hospital. So by the nature of our preferences, we tend to identify our resources for these underserved populations. But what you can do to further your outreach is to say, hey, local mental health center in my community, we're opening our waiting list for people with disabilities. Maybe you'd like to share this with your case managers. I know what happens when we share that we're opening our waiting list and the wrong person or the right person gets that information and they tell the whole world about it. I do know that. But what we don't want to do is to try and keep it a secret, so that nobody can find out except, the people in our small little circle, because that could get us into trouble. So doing your best effort to reach people who need this resource more than ever. And how wonderful that we have this resource finally. We did not have it last year. So we want to try and get it into the hands of the people that really need it. Here's an example public notice. We'll send a Word document following today's webinar. Again, it's too much information. You got to pick and choose. The black is what we would like to see. The red is where you can personalize it. What I'm going to ask is that before you publish this public notice, you send it to your SPOC. So your SPOC can review it and potentially pass it by their supervisor here at the Division of Housing, so we make sure we're meeting the mark of the public notice and we don't have to start over and do it again if we missed an important detail in that, so we don't lose any time. Opening and closing the waiting list. So opening the waiting list, if you do not currently have an open waiting list, I do know some of you have just an open waiting list all the time. This doesn't apply to you. You can be taking those applications if your waiting list is open all the time. If you do not currently have an open waiting list, you must give a minimum 30-day public notice before you open the waiting list. That public notice says, you published it today, whatever the day is, May 15th. And then I'm going to publish it in the newspaper. Okay, probably not till tomorrow, May 16th. And it says that on June 15th, that's 30 days from May 16th, our waiting list will be open. That's what they mean by a minimum 30-day notice. You're telling them when the waiting list is open in the public notice, it's 30 days in the future to the day. That's the required reporting in a public notice. If you are going to close the waiting list, this can be done at your discretion. Again, your waiting list can remain open indefinitely. So if you do not have an open waiting list and you say, hey, public notice, I'm opening my waiting list, you don't have to put a closing date if you want to keep it open indefinitely. Now, I would strongly encourage our metro area or our Front Range communities to maybe not do that. This probably makes more sense for our more rural communities where you're not getting as much traffic. Now, I will say, if the right or wrong agency finds out you have a waiting list that's open all the time, they start sending all of their people from all over the state to apply for your waiting list. So just something to consider. Your waiting list can remain open for a fixed period of time, but that information must be included in the public notice. Our waiting list will open on June 15th for 24 hours and will close on June 16th at 11:59 p.m., right? As specific as possible. So people know applications will not be accepted after this time. Our recommendation is that you close the list when it contains an adequate pool for whatever your community or agency looks like for 12 to 24 months of applicants. Now, our metro area, larger agencies can keep their waiting list open for 24 hours and probably get 3 years worth of applicants. Whereas a smaller community maybe keeps their waiting list open for a week and gets enough for a year or, a year and a half's worth of applicants. You guys know that. You guys know what that looks like for your community. I saw Anne's email or question pop up. It only needs to be posted one day, Anne. So if you were going to post it on January, man, June 15th. It only needs to be in the newspaper on June 15th. That said, if it's going to be on your website, it does need to be on the website for the duration of that public notice time. But it only has to be in that newspaper one day. All right. Let's talk about our local preferences. When you open a wait list, I'd strongly suggest that you open it for specific preferences that the Division of Housing has identified as the preferences we would like our vouchers to serve. That is not to say that you cannot open your waiting list for anybody. You can do that. And I know in some communities, it really is important to just have a low income housing option for everybody. It is important to have a low income housing option for everybody everywhere. But because the need of people at the 30% AMI income limit is so vast, in order to really reach those who need it the most, we choose local preferences that give folks an extra point so that when the wait list is resequenced and weighted, the people with the most need fall to the top. It's intentional. We do this intentionally. Again, it's not to say that a low income family who does not have any of these other things in their life happening is not also in need of this voucher. We know that. Suggestions on how we can use our vouchers to reach those most in need. Our first local preference is people experiencing homelessness. We define this in our admin plan. It's very specific. It is for people sleeping in a place not designed for or used as a regular sleeping accommodation. This includes their car, a park, an abandoned building, a bus or train station, the airport, a camping ground, etc. It is not, unfortunately, for people who are couch surfing, staying, with friends that don't have a fixed address. This is for literal homeless people. If they are living in a shelter designed to provide temporary living arrangements, this is an emergency shelter, congregate shelter, transitional housing usually has that 48-month expiration date. Hotels or motels that are paid for by an organization or government program, they too are also considered someone experiencing homelessness for purposes of this preference point. Or if they're exiting an institution where they were for less than 90 days, and prior to that were residing in an emergency shelter or somewhere not meant for human habitation prior to entering the institution, they meet this preference point. We have a verification of preference form, which I believe I am sending. I'm going to write it down, where somebody can say, yes, I work at a shelter. Yes, I work at transitional housing. Yes. They can verify when they come to the top of the waiting list that they do meet this preference. They must have their preferences verified before we can give them the voucher. All right, second local preference, somebody with a disability. This is any person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, has a record of such impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment. The HUD regulations do not allow the housing authority, any housing authority, to adopt a preference for admission for a specific disability. So it cannot be somebody where it's open to people with a mental health diagnosis or with a intellectual or developmental disability diagnosis or a traumatic brain injury or a spinal cord injury and so on and so forth. Disability is Social Security's definition of disability. If you meet this definition and can verify it, either by the receipt of SSI or SSDI for disability, or a knowledgeable medical professional signs off and says you are a person that meets the Social Security definition of disability, they are eligible for this preference. And just as a reminder, this is old. This goes back 15 years. But they are not required to be an active participant with your agency if you happen to be a disability service providing agency. It can be anyone in the community that meets this definition that can apply for the wait list. Third preference, victims of domestic violence. And we've had to really hone in on what this definition means. We learned in the past to be very clear. And so our definition in the admin plan is individual currently experiencing, that's underlined, domestic violence that is resulting in a need for housing. This is not a black and white scenario. We know domestic violence looks different. We know it's not always reported. we know. But in order to meet the terms of this preference, we have to be specific in our definition. So currently experiencing domestic violence resulting in a need for housing. Domestic violence can mean an act or a threatened act of violence upon a person with whom the actor is or has been involved in an intimate relationship. Colorado is very helpful, and it defines what intimate relationship means. This is a relationship between spouses, former spouses, past or present unmarried couples, or persons who are both the parents of the same child, regardless of whether they had been married or lived together at any time. What domestic violence is not is my roommate who is not in any sort of relationship with me is being violent towards me. My mom is being violent towards me. My child is being violent towards me. Yes, that is a domestic situation, and yes, that is violence, but we have to be very clear, this is who we intend on serving with this preference. Now, when we verify this, when they come to the top of the waiting list, it's not a clean verification because not everybody has reported that they are a victim of domestic violence to law enforcement. So this is where I know the preferences verification, we have a lot of conversation with you all just to make sure that we're doing this right. And not excluding anybody, but we're not leaving this open to anyone just choosing this to get an additional point. I know people don't do that, but sometimes they do. So we just want to be really clear when we discuss this preference. We have our fourth preference is for non-elderly disabled families transitioning from nursing homes and other approved institutional settings. It's like our CAT voucher program. Except that they can be elderly in the CAT program. But this is to get folks who, because there's no other option, they are placed in an institutional setting. They aren't elderly. They are a person with a disability. There's no other solution, so they end up in a nursing home. They end up in a mental health institute longer than they should be. They end up in a hospital. They end up in a home for individuals with developmental or intellectual disabilities. With a little support and this voucher, they don't need to be in that restrictive setting. We can move them out of those settings. This is a really important preference, I think gets overlooked. We're fortunate because we do have a voucher program that is, the intention of getting folks out of the nursing homes and into independent living with some transitional supports. But this is really intended to continue that work that our CAT team currently does. So just one of our chosen preferences. And then finally, there's an additional preference point if an applicant is a current participant in another Division of Housing Rental Assistance program. I've listed them here. These are programs that tend to have a little more support, assistance, resources. Our permanent supportive housing program, our state housing voucher program that has tenancy support services, our CAT community access team vouchers that come with transition coordination services, and so on. Sometimes people are regulated. They're in these programs when they need the most help. They stay in those programs for several years and they're doing better. They don't need that level of assistance. So our intention is to open these very limited spaces in these programs for the next group of people, as I mentioned, in terms of our project-based buildings. Let's get people out of the coordinated entry system who need this entry-level assistance and support. Let's move folks out of these programs who don't need that level of support into an independent voucher. This is an important value for us at the Division of Housing. It's the moving on. It's to keep resources available for the people that need them at that time. In order to do that, we can give them an extra point, helps kind of move them up on that waiting list. Those are our preferences. Any questions on preferences? So Anne's asking, can the agency choose the local preference for the waiting list? Yes, you can choose 1, 2, 3, all. The extra point for being an existing DOH participant, that's not enough. I mean, if they are, they just get that point. You can't say, oh, sorry, we didn't open it for that preference. That's just a point we have in the background. But for those first 4, you can just choose people with a disability. That can be the only preference. And so as applications come in, if they don't check that off, and you send it back to them and say, you have 10 days to like check a preference, you send them the sorry, you didn't meet the qualification to get on the waiting list. Now, as an agency, you can choose to say, oh man, they didn't check that preference that we opened the waiting list for, but you know what, we're going to take them anyway. They just go to the bottom of the waiting list because they're not eligible for any points. So you might get to them eventually, but they're not going to flow to the top. You guys have that choice. You can pick 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of you can pick none. You can just open the waiting list for income eligible families, which again, I say makes sense in some communities, and we're here for it. If someone is getting rapid rehousing now, can they get HCV without being on the wait list? No, they cannot, because we don't have the housing choice voucher is a waitlist program at the Division of Housing. I know it's a lottery program in some housing authorities, but for the Division of Housing, it's a waitlist program. We can't just put people who are currently in one program onto the HCV program. They have to apply. They have to be drawn in the order that they fall on the wait list. And this is because HUD does the Section 8 Management Assessment Program, CMAP, every year and says, did you follow the wait list process of putting people on the wait list, weighting their preferences appropriately, looking at date and time appropriately, and when you drew them and gave them the voucher, were they number one? And if they were not, we get in trouble. So HCB is just one of those programs you have to apply. It's not we can, with the exception of project-based vouchers, that's very different, because they are considered on the HCV program through an HCV funded project base. That's different. And then mainstream. If we just had mainstream vouchers and you had a wait list and number 5 on your wait list was non-elderly and disabled, I can grab number 5 and forget the rest. Those are the only 2 situations. So no. Long answer. It's the only way I know how to answer questions. Cool. Okay, let's talk about the 2-step application process. Just remember, we're going to have office hours, and you can always reach out to your SPOC if I'm talking too fast and you need more information on some of these slides. I just don't want to run out of time because I have another webinar I have to go to at noon. The 2-step application process. We have a pre-application. We have a full application. We use the pre-application, which is 1 page plus that supplement form that's required by HUD, where our applicants and households can say, in case of emergency, in case you don't hear from me, in case of these very specific reasons that I have told you, please contact this person. So if someone comes to the top of the wait list, they filled out their pre-application, we reach out to them, they don't respond, they filled out that supplemental form that says, call my mom. If I don't respond to you, you can call their mom. We want to make sure these vouchers get to the applicants. And HUD knows that not everybody answers the phone when the phone rings or responds to mail when the mail comes. So we want, again, that's part of our application process. So the pre-application is filled out by families when you open your waiting list. This is that form you will make available via email, via come to my office and fill out the form on this day, via requested by mail and send it back, whatever you choose in your public notice. But do make sure it's accessible to everyone. The pre-application collects information that's needed for initial assessment and eligibility for admission onto the waiting list. We collect only what we need so that this form is not overwhelming and our applicants go, forget it, I can't. This is asking for too much. I don't know what my bank account is. I don't have access to my paycheck stubs. We're not there yet. We just want them to declare to us who's in your household, what's your, vital statistics, how much income a year does your family have? What are the preferences that you are eligible for? Ask a couple questions about your, criminal background that we have to for this program, sign it. And then when you do the data entry into Elite, you don't have to go through 8 pages of an application. You can just get them into that wait list really quickly. It's intended for maximum efficiency. We're not conducting verification at the time of the pre-application. So if they say they're a person with a disability, if they say they have income, they don't have to provide verification of that in that initial step to get on the waiting list. That's an unnecessary barrier. Things change if they don't get drawn from the waiting list for 6 months. All that information may be different. They're going to have to go through that process again. So no verification, nothing is needed, just that pre-application signed. and completed by the household and turned into you in the time frame that you have identified in your public notice. We do not publish the pre-application or the full application on our website. This is something you will have to ask for, although I will send it in a follow-up email today so you can have access to it. When we publish it on the website, all of a sudden we're getting that completed pre-application from everywhere in the literal world, not just the country, of people who are so excited that they found a housing application and they want housing. It's just, no matter how we try and figure it out, the web is forever. And we ask that you do not publish it on your websites as well. That's a big ask. And if you do publish it on your website for that one day or whatever, that it gets pulled down right away, because I'm telling you, we get these free applications randomly throughout the year from all over the place. And so that's how we avoid that. Okay, accepting applications. This process must be accessible to everyone, including individuals with a disability, individuals who are elderly, and individuals with limited English proficiency. We do have the pre-application available in Spanish. I do believe we have the pre-application available in Spanish. I will double check. But we want to make that available so that we are not, again, unintentionally excluding members of our community from accessing this resource. When you get that application in, you're just going to do a real preliminary assessment of eligibility. Did they sign it? Is it complete? Did they choose the preference that you said the waiting list? We're only opening to people experiencing homelessness. They picked domestic violence. Fortunately, that wasn't what we opened the waiting list for, so this may not be an eligible application. But you don't want to sit on it and wait. If they didn't meet the requirements of signing it, filling out the information, we want to offer them an opportunity to correct it if they can. But you're definitely going to want to date and timestamp the applications when they're received. So if somebody says, I turned the application, you could go, right, but it was the day after we said you should turn the application in. Now, in order to avoid the 8,000 people lining up outside your building at 2:00 in the morning on the day your wait list is open, we would suggest saying that it's going to be randomly sorted. So it's not by date and time. So if you showed up, at the very end of the day and turned in your application, you have just as much opportunity to be like randomly sorted into the wait list sequence than anyone else. Now, if you have multiple preferences, regardless of the random sort, somebody with 3 preferences is going to be at the top, but they're just going to be randomly sorted among the others that have 3 preferences, right? Our system's smart enough to do that. So in order to avoid those scenarios, especially in the metro areas, in the Front Range, where the word gets out and now 150, that's a dream. 1,000 people show up. I'm telling you, this happened at Aspen Point, the mental health center down in Colorado Springs many years ago. At 2:00 in the morning in the winter, people were lined up, and it made the news, and it was something we learned. So it's okay to say in your public notice, it's not first come first serve. Everyone who is eligible will be entered onto the waiting list and randomly sorted. If you've done your preliminary assessment and everything looks great, you want to send a letter, okay, to let people know we've accepted your application and we've placed you on the waiting list. And this must be done within 30 days. Sooner, because we've got some time frames to meet in terms of, but we want to make sure our families know they've been added to the wait list. If we're going to deny that application for any reason, we must send them a letter within 30 days, letting them know they were determined ineligible. And they have the opportunity to say, oh man, I forgot to sign it, or I am homeless, I just didn't check that box. So if we got some stuff we can talk about the office hours, I'm not going to say it here. We've got some ways to make sure you get those completed applications so we don't have to worry about these denied applications. Okay, managing the wait list depending on program size and frequency of which vouchers are issued. So are you an agency that issues a voucher a week because of turnover, or a voucher a month? The full application, which is our 6-page application, I think, can be completed at several different phases in the process. If you manage a smaller program where vouchers are issued not very frequently, you can do the full application when they come to the top of the waiting list, right? We're going to draw 2 people from the waiting list. We're going to have them complete the full application to make sure they still meet that preference that they applied for that got them to their position on the waiting list. And then now we're going to look at their income. Are they income eligible? Things can change in the time that someone's been on a waiting list, but that's when you can do that full application because you have time. You're only issuing a few vouchers a month or so. Now, if you manage a larger program where you are issuing vouchers on a weekly or monthly basis, when vouchers are available, which they are, consider sending that full application to the top 5 or 10 participants or more on your existing waiting list so you can get that eligibility completed proactively. So, and I think we have letters for this too. So like you run your wait list, you look at your top 10 or your top 20, and you just have a packet. Here's the full application. Here's the letter. You're coming close to the top of the waiting list. We want to make sure you're still eligible. Please fill out this full application. Provide verification of your preference that you said, your person with a disability or person experiencing homelessness, so on. Provide verification of all household members' income. Let's get them ready. Let's get their little packet ready so that when we pull them from the waiting list and invite them in for a briefing, we know they're not going to show up for the briefing and then go, oh, you still don't meet that preference. We're going to have to put you back on the waiting list, or you make too much money. You're not eligible. Let's get that out of the way before we invite them in for the briefing. Again, these are suggestions on how to manage the waiting list. All right, the 2-step application process regarding the full application. This is that larger application packet that we have. This is going to be filled out by families when they reach the top of your waiting list or when they're getting close to the top of your waiting list, depending on your program size and your processes. This full application is going to verify their income, their preferences, their social security number, via the way we can, verify a social security number, their vital docs. Again, we're talking about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, so we're still kind of at the mercy of what we need for the federal program here. Any consent or that 9886A, we're going to get that signed here with that full application. And just to verify that there's at least one person with eligible citizenship status, which is a requirement in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So what we suggest for those of you who want to do this pre-eligibility is to run yourself if you can, or request from your SPOC a copy of your agency's current waiting list. You can use that to send that pre-briefing letter we talked about in the full application to like the first page of your waiting list, just to get people starting to think about, all right, it's getting close. Let me start pulling my income verifications. Let me get all the IDs and the birth certificates for the people, and have them ready so we can avoid any delay. And then you want to give the applicants a deadline to respond, to provide that documentation so that we're not waiting like, is this person ever going to respond? No, you have to respond to us. This is kind of a mini purge when you think about it. We're not doing a full purge, but this is kind of what you'd be doing. We just want to make sure the people out there on this list are still out there, in Colorado, or still need this resource. They might not still need it. And so this is how you can kind of work through that list. Let's send it out. Let's send the letter. Let's see what comes back, right? This may be an opportunity to get people off the list that shouldn't be on the list, so you can keep it moving. So what if an applicant does not respond? We've got a system for this. If the letter is not returned by the post office and the applicant does not respond by the date you put in that letter, you must remove them from the wait list. Yes, there are ways where the applicant can say, I was in the hospital, or I was out of the state helping a parent. We're not monsters. We can look at these case-by-case situations, but in general, you sent them the letter, it didn't get returned by the post office, you gave a healthy 15 days to return it, right? And they still didn't return it, then they're removed from the wait list. If the letter is returned by the post office, but it doesn't have a forwarding address, just that yellow sticker that says return to sender, the applicant is removed from the wait list. Because remember, they have to let us know when they have an address change. I do believe that is in your acceptance letter, your approval letter that you sent to them, that they've made it onto the waiting list. Gonna double check that before I send it to y'all. They need to tell you when their address changes. How on earth are we gonna find them? How are we supposed to know? If it comes back without the forwarding address, we have to remove them. If the letter is returned and it includes a forwarding address on that little yellow sticker, resend out the pre-briefing letter and the full application to that new address. Update that new address in the waiting list in Elite. So in the future, we don't send something to the old address. What if the applicant does respond? Yay, best case scenario. If the applicant responds and is determined eligible and meets the preferences that determined their place on the waiting list, remember, man, sometimes they check all 4 boxes and it's like, how can you be homeless and non-elderly exiting an institution? That doesn't make sense. You want to make sure that, that they do meet these preferences, because those preference points got them to their position on the wait list. If they don't meet both homeless, which they might not after 4 months or something of being on the waiting list, they might have, that status may have changed. They're probably always going to be a person with a disability if that was one of your preferences. But they maybe no longer are eligible for that homeless preference. We had to take that point away because those 2 extra points kind of bumped them ahead of some other folks on the list. So again, if they meet those preferences, and you're going to send out a letter to schedule them for that applicant briefing. If they respond and we determine they are ineligible, we're going to send the corresponding letter giving them a timeline to appeal that. So, sorry, you don't meet this preference eligibility anymore, or preference point that you said. So if there's only one preference we opened up the waiting list for and you don't meet it anymore, you're no longer eligible. If an applicant responds but no longer meets the preferences that determine their place on the waiting list, but they still meet some of the preferences, you can remove that preference and then ask your SPOC to resequence the list. So we can remove that preference in Elite. It gives them a smaller weighted point system. We resequence them and it puts them in the correct spot on the waiting list, because they're not eligible to be that high on the waiting list if they don't meet those preferences anymore. And again, sometimes people's preferences change from when they apply to when they are offered the voucher. Let's talk about 20 minutes purging the waiting list. To update the waiting list for efficient and timely voucher issuance, we encourage you, agencies, to conduct a full purge of your waiting list at least annually. Prior to opening the waiting list, you should plan on purging anyone that is on your current waiting list. Now, because we're in this interesting time, you can be purging your current waiting list while simultaneously opening your waiting list. But what we ask is that you don't add those new people from the new waiting list that you've opened to your existing waiting list that still has people on it. Because that was a finding from an audit we had a couple of years ago, that we started intermingling the different times of waiting lists being open. And these are for those agencies that don't have a waiting list open all the time. Obviously, it's different. So really, let's talk to your SPOC, come to office hours. Let's talk through, I have this current waiting list. It still has 50 people on it. What do you suggest I do? Because I want 100 vouchers. Let's problem solve those case by case at office hours or with your SPOC. And then you're going to send an updated request letter and the pre-application form via first class mail to the last known address on file for the applicant that they've provided you. Now, if they've sent you, hey, I moved, or I have a new mailing address, we're updating that in Elite, right? So when we do the mail merge from Elite, we get you all the names and addresses of the people on your waiting list. You mail merge it into your letter. It's going to have the most current address that we have available. And again, if they haven't told us that they've moved, they've missed out on that purge opportunity. The letter must provide a date or deadline by which they must respond. We suggest 15 calendar days for when you send the letter, but we also suggest that you tell them that specific date they have to respond by. Don't leave it up to the math, folks, 15 calendar days is going to look different, 15 different people. So just in your head, say, okay, 15 calendar days is this date. That's the date you're going to use in that letter when they have to respond. The letter has to say, and we have this template letter for you. The letter must state that failure to respond will result in removal from the waiting list, so that when they don't respond, they can't act surprised when we remove them from the waiting list, because we told them if they get the letter. The letter must state that the applicant has the right to an informal review. Again, if we purge someone from the waiting list and they come back and say, but look, and here's all my extenuating circumstances for why I didn't respond in time, we still want to give applicants an opportunity, not an informal hearing. They do have the option for an informal review, so that we don't take people off the waiting list that we should. If the letter is returned with no forwarding address from your purge, the applicant is removed from the waiting list. The letter is returned with a forwarding address. You're going to resend that letter, update the address in Elite, and provide them with a new 15 days, right? Don't use that same old date. Give them a new 15 calendar day deadline for which they need to respond. And just our blanket statement: if a family is removed from the waiting list for failure to respond, the Division of Housing Director of Office of Rental Assistance, that's me, may reinstate the family if it is determined that the lack of response was due to PHA error or to circumstances beyond the family's control. And I'm saying this because we've had situations in the past that have escalated to levels beyond the Division of Housing, where we mistakenly remove somebody from a waiting list, and we shouldn't have. So we want to just leave that open, that we may, at our discretion, put people back on the waiting list. All right, frequently asked questions. Maybe you have one of these questions. What do I do if an applicant comes to the top of the list but's not ready to receive a voucher at that time? Can they go to the bottom of the list or retain their current placement? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. If a family comes to the top of the waiting list and they don't want the voucher at that time, when it is offered to them, they must be removed from the list. Now, reasonable accommodations may play a role here. Somebody comes to the top of the waiting list and they are in the hospital and they cannot make it to the briefing. Please, these are case by case. Let's talk about them. But if somebody comes to the top of the waiting list and just says, oh, I'm in this great new relationship, I don't need a voucher right now because I'm in this relationship with this person and we're doing great and we have our apartment, but I might want it later. Can you please put me at the bottom of the waiting list? We cannot do that, unfortunately. So that is a no. Can I advertise the jurisdiction covered by my agency in my notice announcing the opening of the waiting list? I'm so sorry to say that no, we cannot do this in our public notice, because the Division of Housing's jurisdiction is the entire state of Colorado. So when HUD awards the Division of Housing our vouchers, they say, Division of Housing, PHA, your jurisdiction is the entire state, and you are awarded a certain number of vouchers from us because you cover the entire state. And we appreciate you. I'm sure that's what HUD says. They appreciate me so much. But that's maybe why we have a larger award. And so, but then we choose to partner with all of you, and we are so grateful for you, to serve your local communities that you know best. And unfortunately, HUD doesn't recognize that. HUD recognizes the PHA as the Division of Housing. The Division of Housing's jurisdiction is the state of Colorado. So when you open your public notice, you can't, unfortunately, say only residents of, Mesa County or whatever are eligible to apply. That's not allowed with our vouchers, unfortunately. Come to office hours, we can talk about creative ways to make sure the people in your community are the people applying for these vouchers, but it cannot be done via the public notice. And we can't give a local preference for jurisdiction, unfortunately. Again, because the Division of Housing's jurisdiction is all 64 counties in Colorado. How often should I purge my waiting list? This depends on your waiting list size. We do suggest purging at least annually. If you have 2,000 people on your waiting list, and I know there will be a time where some of you do have that, we would suggest mini purges, right? Take the first 10 pages of your wait list and do a mini purge every few months, 6 months. Maybe I'm not thinking about that correctly, but we would suggest more frequent, smaller purges of those at the top of your waiting list, just to keep that everything like current and ready to go. Should we get a bunch of new vouchers from HUD? They didn't give us a bunch of new vouchers. They funded us for vouchers we did not issue last year. Well, I don't want to be incorrect in speaking. There are no new vouchers from HUD. We just have excess funding to spend, which to us equates to 2 more vouchers. How long do I have to advertise? There is no length requirement. That public notice does only need to be put in the paper one day, at least 30 days before you open the waiting list. If you do it 45 days before you open the waiting list, fine. But the minimum is 30 days, but it only has to be in the newspaper once. So if you opt for a longer advertisement because maybe you're trying to reach more people based on where you live, great. Do we need to advertise when we close the waiting list? Nope, there's no requirement that says if you have that waiting list, it's open all the time. And you go, oh no, somebody found out we have an open waiting list. You can close it tomorrow. You do not have to advertise it. However, if you want to reopen it again, you have to give that 30-day notice. And if you are doing a waiting list opening through the public notice, but you're only going to have it open for a set amount of time again, that has to be in the public notice. It's going to be open from this time and it closes at literally this hour and minute on this day. And I really suggest you put that hour and minute in there. Just believe me, you're going to want to do that. What if an applicant cannot verify a preference that was on their pre-application when they come to the top of the list? That preference will be removed in Elite. If they have already been drawn from your waiting list, your SPOC can remove the preference, add them back onto your waiting list, and resequence the list. What if an applicant is determined to be over income when they come to the top of the waiting list? In this case, if an applicant is over income, they are not eligible for the voucher, unfortunately. We will send an eligibility mandatory denial template letter. HUD is clear in their income targeting for housing choice vouchers that at least 75% of the housing choice vouchers that they administer must go to families who are the very low income. And that is at 30% AMI or less. There is some flexibility for, no, I'm sorry, that's extremely low income, 30% AMI or less. The very low income is 50% AMI or less. We have a little flexibility. A housing authority can have, like I said, at least 75% of our families have to be at that 30% or extremely low income limit. Do you have some flexibility? If you have an applicant who is not at 30%, but does meet the 50% AMI, reach out to your SPOC. We have to do a quick look at our income targeting to make sure that the people we are serving, we're still hitting that requirement that 75% of our households meet that extremely low income. 75% of the people who've had a new admission have to meet that extremely low income before we approve. But generally, we can approve somebody at 50% AMI. So it's not a conversation ender. That's a continued conversation with your SPOC. This is a list of some of the forms and templates that I will send following today's webinar. Here are some resources you will have access to when you get the printout of this presentation. But it's just some more information on what it looks like to open your waiting list. We have a whole chapter in the admin plan about it. HUD has a great guidebook to talk about eligibility determination and when to deny assistance and so on. Any questions? 8 minutes. Diana's asking, what is the AMI amount? So we have posted on our website income limits. It's by county for the most part. So when you are sitting down, Diana, so you're in Weld County, right? And you're sitting down with a family and they're going to lease up in Weld County, you're issuing them the voucher. You're going to look at their income that they brought to the briefing. Here's my paycheck stubs. Here's my benefits letter for everybody in the household. And there's 3 of them in the household. You're going to go to the income limits table that we have on our website. You're going to look Weld County, 3-person household, and it'll tell you 80% AMI. That's our low income. sorry, folks, we can't serve you at 80% AMI with this program. 50%, that's our very low income, and 30%, that's our extremely low income. Your family, all of their income annualized for a family of 3 on that income table must be at least 50% AMI. That's a Collier Spock, but at 30% AMI. We can walk you through that as well. Oh, Abigail, yeah, if you want to send us, and Kimberly, you probably just answered her.
Sorry, I just said that. Just type us your email and we'll add you.
Yep, we'll put you in there so that you get a follow-up. And then if the people you are filling in for today are on our waiting list, they will also get this information. Our waiting list, oh my gosh, our mailing list. Okay, this is exciting, everyone. This is like a bad kind of excitement. Awesome, I'm writing that down right now, Abigail. Thank you. So you'll get a follow-up invitation to our office hours that we have scheduled. It's just really informal. You sit, in a Zoom and ask your specific questions about your waiting list, about questions you have. I hope to have your what we can give you in new vouchers by Friday. I will reach out to the Family Unification Program agencies who serve youth with vouchers to talk about your baselines. I think that's all my follow-up. Adriana is asking if posting the public notice in the local newspaper, and we also want to update our website, do both need to be 30 days or only for the newspaper? If you are going to publish the public notice, 30 days for sure in the newspaper, and I would suggest as close to 30 days on your website as possible, just in case somebody and they do, because access to resources, if people felt like they missed out on an opportunity, you'll hear about it. And we do that when we have to publish our PHA plan draft. We put it on our website on the same day that it is published in the Denver Post. So that's a sticky answer, but as close to possible. Yes, I would publish them on the same day. All right, any other questions? Wonderful. Well, thank you all for hanging in on our long webinar. Let's see. Okay. I'm gonna stop recording.